Hey, what's up everybody? I am John Ricard, and today I am going to be answering your photography questions that you asked me. Okay, that's not really true. Truth of the matter is, I'm just not active enough on social media to really get a lot of questions. So nobody really asks me questions, but I always see these photographers doing these segments where they're answering questions that were sent in. So since no one asks me questions, I decided to answer the questions that you asked of another photographer. So in this case, I was watching a video by Manny Ortiz, the link is down below, where he answered some questions. And since nobody asked me any questions, I figured the best I could do was to answer the questions you asked him. So here we go, my answers to Manny Ortiz's questions, okay? Here we go. You've talked about being an introvert. How did you overcome that? Again, question wasn't asked of me, but the truth is I definitely consider myself an introvert. I picked up a camera because I didn't want to be in front of the camera. I wanted to be behind it. But I think understanding this introvert thing is understanding how many people consider themselves to be introverts. I've been at corporate events where they're talking about networking and things, and they'll say to all the people in the room, how many people here consider themselves to be introverts? And like 85% of the hands go up. And these are the same people that you were looking at, in the morning or during lunch, where they were very active and talking to people and introducing themselves to people, and they wouldn't seem like introverts to you. But a lot of people know how to just fake it and cover it up and pretend to be extroverts. And that's definitely what I do. And if you actually look at the Manny Ortiz video, he talks about feeling like an introvert. But when you watch his videos, you don't get a sense of that. You looks like a confident guy who enjoys talking to people and enjoys being on camera. So I think the key to the introvert thing is understanding that when you feel like you are an introvert, you're trying to talk to this person, understand that that person probably feels like an introvert as well. And if you can just do a little bit to keep the conversation going, have a little bit of conversational skills to say something about some sports game yesterday or what they're wearing or something like that, that if you can just kind of carry a little bit of the weight and try to put across an air that you're kind of comfortable, then they're going to be more comfortable and you can have that conversation go. But just recognize that person's an introvert too. You just have to be a little bit more willing to push the envelope than that person, and that conversation can go well. Next, how do you deal with imposter syndrome on your daily workflow? Not really sure what they mean by daily workflow there, but how do you deal with imposter syndrome? Again, I have to take this question personally. I don't know if I can really give advice to others, but for me, I don't have imposter syndrome in photography. Now, I don't have it really anywhere. I just let that go in my life. And in terms of photography, I mean, the first time I ever sold a photograph to a magazine was probably like 1990. So I've been doing this way too long. Too many people have paid me money to do this. Too many people have set up shoots for me or sent me to different places to take pictures for me to ever feel that I don't belong here or I'm not qualified or whatever. It just doesn't enter my brain. And if imposter syndrome were to come in anywhere in my life, it would have been when I got my black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That can be an area where you feel like, man, am I worthy of a black belt and on, and you can have all this stuff, but I just release it. I trust my teacher. If my teacher, Marcelo Garcia, says I'm a black belt, then I'm a black belt. Conversation over. Go take it up with him. So I just dismiss imposter syndrome. I don't give it any space in my brain. I am what I am. I'm proud of what I am, and I make sure I know what I'm doing, and I just do what I do and leave that imposter syndrome nonsense for someone else. What would you do differently if you had to start photography all over again? This is such a good question. See, one of my problems when I started photography a very long time ago was I very quickly managed to find magazines that would pay for my photographs and record labels too. So my mind was always thinking like, what can I shoot that I can sell? That was all I thought. What can I shoot that can get published? That was the purpose of photography to me. So back in the 2000s, late 1990s too, I guess, I would do a lot of shoots where they would bring me a music artist and, to give him to me for like an hour in a photo studio, and I would shoot him and then or her, and then I would sell the pictures to magazines. So the only thing I would photograph is when the artist was prepared to come on set to where my lights were set up and he was standing on white seamless or whatever color seamless. And I would photograph those pictures, and that was it. because that's what I was going to sell, pictures of the artist on set. It's very logical. It didn't really occur to me to take a picture of me with the artist. To me, that was like unprofessional. You know, my job was to photograph him for a magazine. Why am I jumping in like, let me get a picture with you? And the funny thing was I was a big fan of a lot of the artists that I was photographing, but I didn't take a picture with the artist. Meanwhile, today, those pictures would be really cool to throw up on social media occasionally. Remember, there was no outlet for these pictures back in the day. There was no social media to post them, so why would I take the picture? That was the way my brain was working. But today, it would be cool to have those pictures either just as a memory that I photographed T.I. or Mace or Rihanna or Cardi B or whoever. Like, it would be nice to have those pictures, but I didn't think to take them. It also would have been smart to take pictures of those artists, like talking to their publicist, or maybe they're talking to their manager, or someone that turned out to be another artist a few years down the road, and they were just kind of there as a protege to the artist, or maybe the artist eating lunch or going through the clothing. Now, back in that time period, some people would have objected to those type of photographs because you wouldn't have understood, why are you taking this picture? We don't want this in a magazine. We didn't rent, some $1,000 studio in Manhattan to get a picture of this person eating lunch or going through the clothing. We did it to photograph them on set. So you probably would have gotten some pushback at some point. But a lot of times, I'm sure those pictures could have been taken, especially if I had done things like made prints and the next time I saw the artist, gave them this kind of cool, casual picture or something. Didn't occur to me. It was a big mistake. And I think what I should have done back in those days was I should have thought to myself, what do I find interesting about this scene? What do I think should be photographed? But I wasn't thinking that way. I was only thinking, what is a magazine going to buy? And that was what I photographed. I think it was a mistake from a photographic standpoint. Do you prefer studio or outdoor photography? How hard is it to learn good studio lighting? Definitely prefer being in a studio as opposed to outdoor. I don't like the way the light changes constantly outdoors. And, I shoot everything in manual. So I'm constantly having to, recheck the light, recheck the light, recheck the light, recheck the light. And it interferes with my ability to shoot efficiently and quickly and really focus on the artist. Every second there's a cloud coming, cloud leaving, and it's just the light just keeps changing. When I'm in a studio, I can set up the lighting, get all my numbers right, and then I can focus on the person. So much prefer being in a studio. They said, how hard is it to learn good studio lighting? I think today it's easier than ever. You have a screen right there. Get a 7-foot umbrella. These days, I like the impact version of the umbrella. I think it's about $60 at B&H. 7-foot white umbrella from Impact. You put 2 of those on someone, you're going to have soft, flattering light, just 45 degrees like this going into the person. And you'll have soft, flattering light. Put the camera at 160 shutter speed, ISO 100, 5.6 aperture. Just lock in those settings on the camera, then start adjusting the power on your strobes until the photograph looks good, or until the scene looks good. And it's really not complicated. You can look at the screen and keep calibrating and getting the lighting right or the exposure right. So I don't think it's difficult today. Do you still sell the Sony Addicted t-shirts? I am not a Sony shooter, and I don't expect that I ever will be. Never won a shirt that said Sony Addicted, so I have no answer for that question, all right? What is the importance of personality as a photographer? I think your personality is super important, especially today. A lot of people are competent at taking just an ordinary photograph, and people hire people. They don't just hire the skill set. We can see this with large companies. You remember like Orville Redenbacher Popcorn, or I think it was Juan Valdez with the coffee. These giant brands with big factories would try to humanize it by creating this person, so you could feel like you were dealing with the colonel who fried your fried chicken and not just some big machine that dunked the chicken and then gave it to you. So your personality is definitely important. We connect to people, not just talent. So you definitely want to let your personality shine through. And there's no one personality that works. You just need to be you and find the people that connect to you. Anything new and exciting that you're working on? For me, that would be the 365 project. I think you can define a 365 any way you want. For me, what it means is every day I take a photograph and every day I post a photograph. It doesn't mean that I post the photograph I took that day, because what can happen sometimes is maybe the picture I take today is just a picture of my wife chilling in the house, and she doesn't want that picture published. She doesn't want that posted on my social media. So I might have to pull something I shot a couple of months back so I have something to post today, but I still did the routine of taking a picture today and posting a picture today. Now, I would rather it be that the photo I post today, I captured today. But for me, that's just not always possible. So I try to do that as often as I can. But sometimes it's not from the same day. Most of the times I'll indicate the date that I took the photograph so you don't think I'm trying to be deceptive. What also happens for me is I might take 3 great photos on Saturday and then nothing interesting on Sunday. So it seems kind of foolish to not put the Saturday photo up Sunday when it's a better photograph. So that's why my 365 is not always, photographed today and posted today, but I try to make it that way as much as I can. It's really just something for me, just to kind of make myself shoot more often and to get in the habit of posting on social media and showing up there a little more regularly. So that's what I'm working on as something new. Would the Sony a7R II be a good choice for portrait photography? Look, any camera from the last 10 years is amazing. They are all good. I could still be working on a Nikon D3S and a D3X and everything would be fine in my career. No one would be asking why I'm only at 12 megapixels or whatever. 10 years old, cameras are fine. Sony AR2 is a phenomenal choice. The smart move right now, if money is a concern for you, is to not be on mirrorless, right? Go get a Nikon D850, whatever the Canon version is. I guess there's no Sony equivalent. But use those cameras from before mirrorless. People are giving them away cheap in the used market. The lenses are cheap, and those cameras are phenomenal. I don't think there's any real advantages of a DSLR over a mirrorless. I think mirrorless are superior. But for what most of us are photographing, people standing in front of our camera, funny signs, receding lines of buildings, puddles and landscapes, all of that stuff is just fine with a DSLR. You're perfect. Get an older camera, save money, and just get out there and shoot. What is your best focal length, no matter which manufacturer? Without question, 35 millimeter. I like the fact that I'm a portrait photographer. I really just shoot people. I like the fact that if I photograph someone with a 35, I get the person and their environment. So if I'm photographing like a person who restores cars, I would love to photograph that at 35 millimeter and get the person and get the car that he's working on in the background. In the studio, a lot of times I use an 85 millimeter because there's really no background. It's just like a white background, so I don't need that extra wideness of focal length. So 85 in the studio, but overall 35 millimeter without question. The Leica 35 millimeter Summilux, that lens is, I don't know what it costs, like $5 grand-ish, I guess, something in there. And it is phenomenal. Looks really 3D if you shoot it at 1.4. Just great color. I like the way the edge gets a little dark, the vignette. Phenomenal lens, and that's definitely my favorite choice. How to find clients, models when starting out with portrait photography. How to find clients. It's much easier said than done, like everything. You need to photograph the work you want to be hired for. So if you would like to be hired to photograph, let's say, pictures at rodeos, then you need to be attending rodeos and photographing from the audience. Any ability that you get to connect with people there who can maybe get you a slightly better seat or get you to the equivalent of backstage on a slow day, or give you a press credential on the day that their guy didn't show up. Things like that. If you keep showing up at this rodeo, every time for 2 years or something, then maybe you kind of get on someone's radar, they see the pictures, and then opportunities start to open. But it really starts from you photographing the thing that you wish you were paid to photograph. Don't wait to be hired for it. Get into that world and start working it. The model situation is very different. I mean, years ago it was great. You could go to a site like Model Mayhem and you could throw up a post or browse through the models and get someone to stand in front of your camera. Today, it's ridiculous. There are so many photographers, and every model has a friend who has a camera. She doesn't need you. He doesn't need you. So the best way to do the model thing, in my opinion, is just pay them $50. Someone will stand in front of your camera for an hour for $50, and they'll show up. If you do the free thing, it's a million solicitations that you're making. It's a million emails and contacts that you're sending. And then when you're at that location waiting for them to show up, they invariably don't. But even $50 or $85, someone will come out and stand in front of your camera. And they just want to make the money. You can say, oh, it's going to be me and my friend photographing you. they're fine with that. Now, you and your buddy split a $50 model fee. You're paying $25 each to guarantee someone's going to be there who looks the way you want that person to look or is down with whatever concept that you came up with. And you can get some cool shots without spending too much money. But I think the idea of kind of getting the models for free, in my opinion, is not really worth it anymore in 2023. It's different than it was years ago. What is your favorite Sony, Sigma, and Tamron glass for E-mount? All the lenses are good. I don't care, and I'm not a Sony shooter, but I'm a Nikon shooter, and I stick to Nikon, Leica shooter, and really stick to Leica lenses as well. So it's just a preference, but it's not because I truly believe these lenses are better than the third-party manufacturers. I just prefer to stay with the actual manufacturer of the camera and use their lenses. Your favorite prime and zoom lens, any brand, kind of already talked about that, 35mm, 85mm. The zooms I just use when I'm doing events because they're necessary, and I'm going to talk about that in a second when I talk about something with the, well, let's do that now. So, you know, I use a Nikon Z9, which is the Nikon mirrorless, right? And one of my mirrorless Nikons came with this lens, which is the kit lens 24-70. So I was curious, what's better, the 24-70 new Nikon lens or my older 24-70, which is a 2.8. A little nicer that it's a 2.8 because the kit lens is an f4. So I did something that I rarely do. I actually sat and tested it. I really sat and took two identical photos at the same settings and did some pixel peeping. Rarely ever do this. Came to the conclusion that the newer f4 lens is slightly nicer than the older lens. Just a little sharper, the colors pop a little more. Now, 30 seconds of adjusting in Lightroom and you would not be able to tell a difference between the two lenses, but it did just look a tiny bit better. But notice this, the lens I actually use on the camera is this. Even though I know it's inferior, I use the older lens because it just suits my workflow better. Because for the old lens system, I have the trifecta of lenses, the 17-35, 24-70, 70-200, all in 2.8. And you know, you use this adapter to connect them to the newer camera because the lenses are like 20 years old. But I think in terms of workflow, I preferred the idea of using all three of the older lenses. They all look the same, they all feel the same, they all need the adapter, they're all 2.8. I would rather do that than kind of throw this one lens in that's an f4 that doesn't need the adapter. And the idea that this lens is a little bit sharper or better than the older lens means nothing because my client isn't going to care. All they're ever going to say to me is like, did you get a picture of the CEO with this sponsor? They don't care about those little details. So it's perfectly fine for me to use the older lens rather than a newer. And I think when you're trying to pick lenses, if you're working for clients, think about what the client requirements are. They're probably much lower than your requirements. So you might want to be a little smart with your purchases in that regard. Get the lens that works for you financially or what feels good or what just looks good in your hands is all you really need to do. You don't have to worry about all these tests and which one is a micro dot better than the other. It's pure nonsense. What do you find most difficult when working with people? I don't really find anything difficult working with people. I like working with people. That's why I'm a portrait photographer. Again, my nature is to be introverted. But when I have that camera, you know, the dynamic changes. How many times people have stood in front of my camera and said, you know, all right, just direct me, you know, like I'll do what you say to do. And that makes the interaction easier. That's not how things normally work in your life. But when you pick up a camera, many people are very cooperative and you're, you know, turn the shoulder this way or, you know, would you mind standing over here or change the position or whatever. So I don't really have any problems dealing with people. I enjoy working with people. That's why I became a portrait photographer as opposed to cars or pets or landscapes or something like that. Where did you learn photography? Not really relevant because I learned it so long ago, but back in the day, you did a lot of experimenting. It was complicated because if you were shooting film, there were no options. And, you know, you had to wait a day or a week or at least a few hours to get the pictures back and kind of learn, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. It was not instant. People were not sharing information about how they lit things and, you know, photo diagrams. It just wasn't a thing. And there was certainly nothing like YouTube where you could just watch endless hours and hours of content. I think learning photography today is really easy between having that not even just a digital screen on the back of the camera, but this EVF. It's giving you real-time feedback about what you're doing, and the camera's being so good at autofocus and exposure and all those things. Really not hard to learn photography. Just figure out what is it that you want to photograph and get out there and really master photographing that one thing. Should a photographer get a studio membership if he or she wants to learn studio lighting? Absolutely, you should get a studio membership. These things are pretty cheap today. Even in Manhattan, you can find studio shares for $100 a month where you can get a few hours a month. And I think that's a really good idea. It's nice to be able to shoot in your home. You're not spending any money, but you do have those distractions from you have to move the light so someone can watch TV in the house, or people walking through while you're trying to shoot, or you have to let everybody know, okay, Thursday I want to shoot in the living room. But you know, if you can get a studio space, it's great. It's nice to have a place dedicated to it. And there are even places now where they'll have props set up for you, so you're not limited to just like a white background or something. A lot of places have created these rooms where you have a neon sign that says, whatever, love will last, or follow your dreams or something, and you can do these themed shoots for people. Or they've got like the rose petal room, or a room with a shower, and you can get some really interesting pictures, and it doesn't cost you a lot of money to use these spaces because you just have them for a couple of hours. So definitely, I think that's a good thing if you're dedicated to learning the craft, to having a specific place to do it. If it's within your budget, definitely a good idea. You seem to like Canon glass. What about Sony cameras do you like shooting? What about Sony cameras do you like shooting over Canon? I don't like either one of them. I'm a Nikon shooter. Don't really care about Canon or Sony. If I had to pick one of the two, I would probably go to Sony rather than Canon. But they're all good. All that matters is how it feels in your hand and which one you're connected to. They're all good in 2023. What would be your 3 tips for sharper photos? Kind of confusing question because I'm not sure. I'd have to see the photos to see what's causing the lack of sharpness. I mean, to me, pretty much any lens you buy today, you put it at 5.6 or f8, it's going to be sharp. Use a fast shutter speed. Use that aperture setting I just told you. You should be fine. I'd have to see the pictures. That's too confusing of a question. Last question, why are Leicas so popular? And what are your thoughts of them in regards to image quality? So, I love using a Leica. My dream version of my career as a photographer would be to only take jobs that I could shoot on a Leica M10. So if you wanted me to photograph a concert or something, then I would say, well, I'll do the backstage and maybe get you a handful of decent shots of the artist on stage, but I'm not going to get you like killer concert photos because this is not a camera that's good for that. Nikon Z9, phenomenal at photographing a concert. So I enjoy using it for a lot of reasons. For one thing, I like the fact that because you have these dials and switches on the camera like this, the camera is always however you expect it to be. There are no surprises or mysteries when you use a Leica. So I have a GoPro, for example, and this is a camera that I really dislike. It's a 360 camera, but a lot of times I turn it on and it's not in 360 mode. It's in photo or time lapse or slow motion and all these settings that I don't even use. And I don't understand why can't it be better at remembering where I left it and staying that way. Or cameras like this, you'll have it out and you accidentally touch the screen and all of a sudden now you're no longer in 360 mode. So when you're using a Leica because of these dials and buttons, that just never happens. However you leave it, if you put it down and pick it up 5 years from now, it's going to be exactly the way you left it. And it doesn't do video, so it's never in the wrong mode. It only has one mode. Besides that, it just feels good to click the dials and to move this focusing thing. And when you use a camera like this, you're doing so much of the photographic process. It's a weird thing to me how many people want to reduce their involvement in the photographic process. And I don't understand it. Like, if we're talking about photography strictly as something to make money, I get it. You want it to be as easy as possible. Someone's going to pay you a lot of money to take a picture, and it's a job. So you're going to use the best tool and do whatever you can do to make sure that the picture is perfect. I completely understand that. But if you're trying to have fun shooting, you're doing some family stuff, travel stuff, and even some of your client jobs, like, why do you want to remove yourself from the process? So like a lot of people today are saying, well, I don't want to focus the camera. I want the camera to do autofocus. And I don't want to pick the focus point. I don't want to move my thumb and pick the focus. I just want the camera to figure out where the face is and keep track of it. And I don't want to keep refocusing as the person moves. I want continuous autofocus where it's going to track them and automatically focus. And I want the camera to calculate the correct shutter and aperture and ISO. And I want to make sure that it's right without even looking at the screen. I want to be able to look through the viewfinder and see through an EVF that I am exposed properly because I don't want to have to move my eye and look at the screen. Some of us don't even want to put the camera to our eye anymore. We just want to hold it here and look at the screen. So it's like, for me, the Leica M cameras put me more into the photographic process. Like, I'm not advancing film, okay? Not developing film, not doing that much of the process, but I'm doing more of the photographic process with my Leica than a Nikon or mirrorless camera. The Leica, I shoot it in manual mode like I do my other cameras too, but that forces me to calculate the exposure on my own. I have to focus the camera manually. I have to look through the viewfinder. I have to set all of the dials properly. And I find that's a lot of fun. I love the way the camera looks. I like the way it feels. And sometimes as photographers, we can kind of kid ourselves that we don't care about how things look. I remember years ago, I used to go on these forums and I would complain about the Canon lenses being white. Like they had a white 70 to 200. I'd be like, man, that's so ugly. And all the photographers would go, well, I don't care what it looks like as long as it works. And to me, that's silly because our whole business as photographers is built on a premise that how things look is important. If you have someone who's making muffins and they have bad photos of their muffins that they're trying to sell, we're the ones who walk up to them and say, hey, you need to photograph those muffins better. They're going to say to you, no, I don't, because the muffins taste great and that's all that matters. It doesn't matter about the picture. We're like, no, it does matter. Or people who have a bad headshot, we're walking up to them like, you need a better photo of yourself. They're saying, no, I'm doing fine. I have a job, I have a career, whatever. I don't need a better headshot. Our whole thing is built on we care about how things look. So why would we then turn around and say, well, I don't care if the lens is white and the camera's black as long as it works? I think it's nonsense coming from a photographer. Doesn't make sense to me. So I love the way this camera looks. I like owning it. I like looking at it like it's a piece of art. And I use it, though. I use it really every day, especially with that 365. So the black and white or the color M10 is with me all the time. So if you've ever, and you know, I talked earlier about this idea that I wish I had taken more different types of shots when I was doing some of the music photography that I did. Having a camera like a Leica makes that very possible, makes that easy to do. So had I had a camera like this back in those days, then the Nikon would have been the camera that I used when they stepped on set with the 85mm lens and they're on set with the lighting and all of that. And the minute they walked off set and I want to get a shot of them eating lunch or hanging with their crew, that's when I would have picked up my Leica to get those shots. So having a camera like this, I think, can help you create different shots because you can't make the same shots with this as you can with a Sony A1. So you have to find a different shot. And I think that's a great thing. Just one piece of advice, if you ever want to try one of these cameras, I don't think this is something you can pick up in a store for 5 minutes and use and understand it. You need to get your hands on it for a day or a weekend. Find a place or some way that you can do that. Spend a lot of time with it, and then you might kind of get it after a while. It kind of connects with you, and you're like, man, this is a lot of fun to use and to shoot with, and you just feel like you're doing more of the heavy lifting, which for me is something that I would like to do in my photography. I want to be involved in the process. I'm not trying to hand it off to the camera, except for those few times when the shot is super important, I'm making a lot of money, and I'm nervous that I can't nail it, and I'm going to trust the camera. But that's not that often for me. So I love having one of these Leica M rangefinders. Definitely recommend you give it a try, all right? Anyway, that's it for the questions. Maybe we can do this again, but maybe some of you can actually send me questions, and then I can answer the questions that you asked me instead of having to answer the questions that you asked Manny Ortiz, all right? But thanks for watching. Appreciate you guys.